If you're used to playing Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh! Or a similar trading card game, one of the aspects of Wixoss that might trip you up a bit is the relative lack of freedom you have in interacting during the opponent's turn. Unlike the wide-open priority systems of these other games, Wixoss largely restricts players to interacting only at the start of the attack phase, and even then you really only have 2 effects to use over the course of the entire game. These are your 2 level 2 assist Lyrigs. This can make figuring out how to defend yourself during a game of Wixoss come across as a bit of a puzzle. The basic concept of a defensive strategy in any game is don't lose until you win. So what tools does Wixoss give players to not lose? Or is the whole game secretly just a race to the finish between 2 different flavors of aggro decks? If this is something that's been worrying you as a new player, then rest assured defensive decks absolutely do exist in Wixoss, particularly focused in white and blue. Most importantly, almost all decks are going to feature some form of defense above and beyond their basic 2 assist Lyrigs. But these assist Lyrigs are the most obvious element of your defenses, so we'll consider those first. Most decks are only going to have access to 2 effects that they can use during the opponent's turn, and all but the most aggressive decks out there are going to want to make sure that they're making full use of this attack phase interaction. The gold standard for defenses is Madoka Clap or MC Lion Disrespect. Both have very similar effects, and are able to shut down a wide range of different attack scenarios using a wide range of possible costs. You can sink in extra enter, extra cards in hand, or both at once to shut down more attacks. Other assist options such as Akino Bye Bye or Sanga Strike will also help to close lanes and prevent damage, but these ones will also provide an opportunity for counterattacking on your next turn, and therefore allow you to turn the tables a little bit and push a bit of damage of your own. Which effects you include in your deck are going to largely depend on what the total attack and defense values of them are, how your deck is able to manage their costs, and more broadly how their effects fit into your deck's game plan. These should be your main considerations when you're deciding which assist Lyrigs to include. Now, with the most obvious element out of the way, the rest of your defenses are going to depend on knowing what tools are available to the offensive strategies, and how to best set up your field to stop them. The main way that players push damage in Wixoss is with removal, so naturally any Signy that are resistant to removal are going to be powerful defensive tools. The textbook example of a Signy that does this is Arcane, with her Shadow ability stopping nearly all removal played out there. Only non-targeting removal like Nova Supernova, which is rarely played, or keywords like Landsetter and Assassin are able to attack over or through Arcane for damage, and even then, with her 12,000 power, Lancer is going to be rather tricky, and Assassin is a keyword that shows up very rarely. If Arcane is a terrific defensive card to be playing, Signy with more limited protections can be quite valuable as well. For one example, Xiaoyun is only able to stop level 1 and 2 Signy. She can still be easily removed by level 3 Signy, spells, or Lyrig effects. However, because of how important efficiently costed low-level removal like Lancelot and Romale are to aggressive decks, she still represents a substantial roadblock for the opponent as they try to push in for damage. Even more basic than Signy abilities is Signy power. Much like Xiaoyun is useful because she's able to stop commonly played removal at level 1 and 2, fielding high-powered Signy early in the game will also make it much more difficult for the opponent to punch holes in your field for damage. At level 1, Fuyuki Hakase is able to easily remove Signy with 1000 power for 0 enter, and Romale is able to remove Signy with 3000 or less power for only 1 enter. Beyond 3000 power, however, there's not a whole lot of options at level 1. Generally, the only way to remove Signy above that power threshold is with spells or Lyrig deck effects, both of which the opponent is going to have in very limited numbers. Once players hit level 2, this threshold increases a bit, but most commonly played removal will still struggle against Signy that have more than 5000 power. Knowing the removal thresholds of the most potent and commonly played removal, and then fielding Signy above that threshold, is a simple but ultimately still very effective way of minimizing the amount of damage the opponent is able to push in for. The next element of your defenses is Servants, which form the core of your deck's defenses from opposing Lyrig attacks. The more Lyrig damage you're able to prevent, the more the opponent is going to have to rely on pushing damage through your field, and hence the more effective the first 3 elements of your defense are going to be at stopping that damage. Much like extra damage in aggressive strategies, you don't actually need all that many different effects that let you search or reuse Servants. Just a few effects in your deck are going to go a long way. As a final note, it's worth touching on life bursts. These are the most unreliable elements of your defenses, but they can definitely swing a game in your favor, so they are worth keeping in mind. There is a few different flavors of life bursts, and they all tend to have some kind of a trade-off. Some defend lanes but don't open the lane back up for counterattack. Some defend a lane and open up for counterattack but only against Signy of limited power. Some can open up lanes for counterattack and defense against more powerful Signy but require an enter cost, or they might only target upped Signy. Generally, all of these effects are going to be perfectly playable, and if a card has one of these bursts and it looks like a good inclusion in your deck, then it's likely going to be a good inclusion in your deck. However, as you're crafting your deck, you'll likely have a few slots left over in your life burst lineup where you have a few different options to consider, and here what you want to try and do is make sure that the mix of effects is going to match well with what your deck is trying to do, and is also going to be able to defend you as reliably as possible. There are also a few flavors of life burst that I would outright avoid. Anything that doesn't offer any defense at all is likely not worth the percentages in your defense that you're trading off to play that card. Likewise, any card that has a strong life burst but an overly weak main effect is likewise worth avoiding, since having dead cards in your hand is not a great way to win games of Wixoss. A secret sixth element of defensive decks is a way to win the game. Unlike trading card games like Magic the Gathering, you can't simply float forever in Wixoss. You do actually need to end the game at some point. Unlike aggressive decks, however, you're generally going to need a lot fewer of these effects, just enough to ensure that you're able to put on consistent pressure turn after turn. You don't need many of these effects, and most of your deck is going to be focused on defensive effects anyways, but you do need to have some kind of a plan here. At the end of the day, the most important takeaway is that Wixoss is a very tempo-oriented game. Pure aggro is very rare, even in no-limit lists. There's usually enough space in the deck left over for at least a few defensive tools to make life more difficult for the opponent. Likewise, there's not really any full control decks like you'd find in Magic the Gathering either. However, decks with heavy defensive elements are going to play at a very different tempo than decks with a very heavy aggressive focus, and understanding the objective of both of these types of decks, how they approach the game, and the tools they are each going to bring to the table will go a decent way to improving your game state evaluation and awareness in Wixoss, and ultimately, hopefully, improve your understanding and abilities as a player overall.